I think on that note, we could probably start the session. Everybody's in the room, and I believe that you can all hear and see us. So from my side, my name is Bettine van Vuuren. I'm based at the University of Johannesburg in South Africa, and I've been asked the session, which is on highlighting the scientific research programs, the three main scientific research programs within SCAR, and we'll get to that in a little bit. In the program will run where the three representatives of those programs will give a short overview of the program. And then in the second hour, we really hope to foster some discussion, some chats around greater synergies, collaborations, overlaps, and how we move these, three research programs forward. I think globally, there's a huge emphasis on multidisciplinary, transdisciplinary work. And I think that is what within SCAR and the SCAR leadership wishes for these, the three or the ongoing scientific research programs. With that, thank you very much for joining. Thank you very much for making the time to actually join this session. Welcome also to the speakers and of course to all the people that are actually have joined this session. Just a few housekeeping notes. Remember that you can use what did we say? Are we using the chat function? So you can post your questions and things in the chat function there. The SCAR team will keep an eye on that also. This is, as Deneb has just said, this is the first of two sessions. So this session will be repeated on the 4th of August. Just to allow others to also join, come in, and then to collate from that. I'm not sure that this is that relevant here, but I will mention it here that the recordings will also be uploaded to the SCAR YouTube channel. Not really relevant here, but it would be available there. I think just as I mentioned for the rest of the conference, where people do not wish their recordings to be on the SCAR YouTube channel, they should please opt out by sending an email to scar2022@albanmeetings.com. We can put that in the chat, perhaps the address also mentioned throughout the meetings as well. So with that, Deneb, over to you, who is the SCAR Vice President for Science, to say a few words before we move over to the different research programs.
Yes, thank you, Bettine, and hello everyone, and thank you for joining us. Welcome to this session on highlights of SCAR's scientific research programs. My name is Deneb Karens. I am the SCAR Vice President for Science. And before we get to the main event with the speakers today, I just want to take a few minutes and provide an overview of the SCAR scientific research programs. And I know many of you are familiar with SCAR, but we also have people in the audience who are new to SCAR. And so I just would like this opportunity to go over some of the basics to talk about how these scientific research programs fit into the SCAR structure and also how they come about. So I'm going to start with this organogram of SCAR, which is at our website. And I know there's a lot of things on here. I am not going to go over this in a lot of detail, but I wanted to just give a big picture of how SCAR is put together. And so we have a lot of pieces here. I know you're not going to see my cursor very well, but in the middle where the blue boxes are at the top, we have the delegates, the president, 4 vice presidents that make up the executive committee. We have a secretariat, and I need to say that those are the people that keep SCAR running on a day-to-day basis, so they're quite important. And then below that, we have science groups, geosciences, life sciences, physical sciences. And then there's lots of green and red boxes. These are various expert groups and action groups, which have they have a very specific focus. And so these subsidiary groups are a very important part of how SCAR gets its work done. There are also standing committees, these lighter blue boxes that you see out on the sides, which also have specific tasks and goals. And then we have the 3 scientific research programs that are currently in progress now. And these are the 3 that you're going to be hearing about today. I would encourage you to go to the website and take a look at this organogram, because I think it'll give you a lot of insight into what goes on with SCAR. And there actually is a sheet attached to it that has all the acronyms spelled out, so you can see what they're all about. So what is a scientific research program? So this is a quote from the guidance document for SRPs. And essentially, these are flagship initiatives for SCAR. They look to address new questions about the Antarctic and the Southern Ocean. And they're very important in terms of fostering international collaboration and cooperation, which is the hallmark for SCAR's success. The process of becoming a scientific research program starts with a program planning group. And these are committees that are put together. It's literally a grassroots type of situation where scientists come together. They've identified a big question that is open and needs to be addressed. And so these program planning groups get together and they create proposals. And this is not a short process. Oftentimes it actually takes multiple years for these proposals to develop. There's a lot of community input. Everyone has a chance to comment. And then those proposals are sent to the science groups. If they are approved by the science groups, then they're passed on to the delegates, and it's the delegates who make the final decision on what becomes a scientific research program. I wanted to just make one note that SCAR does not fund research, but the SRPs do have a budget, and that's used mostly for administration and travel and other things along those lines. But the funding for the research is coming from national Antarctic programs. This concept of scientific research programs started back in 2004, and that's when SCAR underwent major restructuring. And here on this slide, you see a list of the first series of SRPs. So you can see from the titles here that they span quite a range of various topics. And within each of those, there are a number of different disciplines that would be involved in addressing the questions that the SRP has outlined. These first SRPs, well, in fact, typically most SRPs will run for about 6 to 8 years. Once these finished, there's a second series that came online. And so here's the list of that second series. And again, you can see the topics are quite varied. The last 5 that are listed there ended in 2020. And then last year, we had 3 new SRPs come online, and those are the 3 that you're going to be hearing about today. So we have Ant Climb Now, which is on the climate system timescales of years to decades. Instant, which is going to look at Antarctica's past, present, and future contributions to sea level. And then Icon, which focuses on conservation and management. So you're going to hear a lot of information about those today and ways that you can get involved. So just a rundown on today's program. We'll have the 3 presentations on the 3 SRPs. And then the last hour of this session will be a panel with the presenters. And they will discuss the ways that these programs interconnect. And then if you could please put your questions into the Q&A, we will get to those when we get to the panel at the end of the session. So I'd like to personally thank you very much for attending, and I hope you enjoy this session, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the Open Science Conference.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Danae, for that overview also. I was trying to do a quick calculation now, but around 15 years, I remember how absolutely daunting it was to walk into this huge organization or society, and it's the one acronym upon the other acronym, and you actually, you know, as a person coming overwhelming, but it does get easier after years. These things do become familiar. Okay, so moving into the program then, the first SRP that will be presenting is ANCLIM Now, and that would be Tom Bracegirdle that will share some slides. The NEP did give an overview of ANCLIM Now, and that it actually followed on ANCLIM 21. Just a little bit about Tom. The bios of the presenters today is on the website, but let me just quickly highlight Tom. So Tom leads the Polar Climate and Prediction Group at the British Antarctic Survey. His research focuses on improving processes, understanding of polar climate variability and changes and linkages between polar and extrapolar regions. I think that bit is quite important. Over the last decade, he's held numerous positions in SCAR Group, notably the Chief Officer of ANCLIM Now with Ilana Weiner, and he's also been a member of SCATS. Tom, over to you. Thank you very much for your time this morning.
Thank you very much, and good morning. So can you see my full screen slide?
Yes.
Excellent. Well, thanks for the invitation to speak today. It's a real pleasure to be speaking so early in this exciting conference. I should acknowledge that the co-chair of ANCLIM Now, Ilana Weiner, is away at the moment, so she couldn't be here, but she and the rest of the team are a major part of everything I'll show. So I'll be giving a flavour of the research programme that ANCLIM Now, and so if you're more interested in some of the things that I talk about, you can always find more at the website, or hear more on Twitter or Instagram and various other channels that you can follow us on. So ANCLIM Now is, as was said earlier, is focused on climate change and variability on the scale of years to decades. And to help put this into context, this plot here, although it shows global temperature, gives a sense of the types of things that we'll be looking at. So I'm just going to see if I can bring up a little laser pointer here. There we go. So this shows global mean temperature with observations in the black, and then different climate model simulations in these different colors, looking ahead into the future. And what you see from this is that the climate change doesn't just happen in a steady curve. There are lots of wiggles and variations along the way. And so you have periods of stable temperature and then rapid changes. And you can see this in the global mean, like this picture here, but actually that's more striking over regional areas like Antarctica. So it's important to understand, not just the steady background change, but also these more rapid variations in terms of making sense of what's happening now, what's been happening in recent decades, and what may happen in the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years. So when we look at the prediction problem, it can go from days to centuries. So on daily timescales, thinking about weather forecasts, that type of thing. And ANCLIM Now's main focus is on this annual to decadal timescale. And there's a range of different processes that contribute to changes on these timescales that are highly important. So things like ENSO, QBO, and then looking on longer timescales, you've got decadal variability, so specific decadal variability and other aspects that have impacts from lower latitudes. The AntClim Now program is structured in a way that is designed to help answer some of the main questions we have in this area, and also to develop strong linkages with other programs, which is what we'll be talking about today. So we're looking at climate variability and the global climate system. So I mentioned Pacific variability there, but there's many other ways in which the variability in Antarctic climate are linked more globally. Understanding what's happening now, and that ranges from some of the rapid decadal changes that we're seeing, but also there is an interest in some of the possible climate linkages to extreme events that are occurring at the moment as well. So that is a key focal point. The predictability of the Antarctic climate system. How well can we confidently estimate changes in the near term? And then looking at global and regional cross-disciplinary impacts and communications to the wider community and other stakeholders in the Antarctic community and globally. So I'm going to go through some slides. I won't say too much more about exactly what's under these themes. So, if you want more information, you can go to our website, and the Science and Implementation Plan is there. What I'm going to do is show some highlights of the activities that we've currently got going in these different themes, just to give you a flavour of how things are getting going with AntClim Now. We're sort of a year and a half old, and that'll be a big. That'll help give you an idea of some of the things we're doing, and some of the things you might want to get involved with, and some of the ways that AntClim Now is linked across different other SRPs and other parts of SCAR as well. So in theme 1, Antarctic climate variability in the global climate system, one of the things that we're focusing on initially is the observations of the Antarctic climate system. If we're going to better understand variability, then we need to continue to improve observations. One of the ways of promoting this that we're running at the moment is a dataset development and stewardship scheme. This is an annual scheme that's run every March. And to put out a call for a small amount of money to help work with people to improve or develop aspects of data sets around Antarctica. And immediately this illustrates this sort of cross-linkages aspect of some of this work. So we've got work with a SUSE endorsed initiative and contributing to helping develop a website and reaching out to bring in more data for that. So Sarah Thompson at the University of Tasmania is working on that one. And then we have Megan Thompson-Munson from the University of Colorado, looking at surface mass balance and snow depth on sea ice, which is a very variable something that has large decadal and annual variability. Is important to understand in the context of AntClim Now. And also Matthew Lozara at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, looking at more traditional, looking at Antarctic meteorological research data and improving the linkages there. And so this is one activity, one example of something we're doing to help improve observational information around Antarctica. Another thing we have a lot of going on is workshops and other conference sessions happening this year. So in understanding present-day climate trends in Antarctica, it's becoming increasingly apparent that trends and extremes are quite tightly linked. So for example, precipitation over the Antarctic continent is strongly linked to short bursts of high precipitation that can be brought about by things like atmospheric rivers, which are a topic of great interest at the moment. And we have a special session at an upcoming conference, the Atmospheric Rivers Conference, that we've helped to fund, looking at that. We're also developing a project to monitor the Antarctic climate system in almost real time using a range of major Antarctic climate indicators. We've got a workshop in Cambridge coming up in October to look at theme 3, which is predictability of the Antarctic climate system. And again, looking at observations, but this time more in the context of bringing together observations and models and trying to make the best use of connecting the two. And registration is still open for this workshop with a deadline of early September, I think the 4th of September. So if you're interested, have a look at our website, there's a link there, or do get in touch. But we are also looking at modeling as well, and beginning to look at the role of year-to-year variability and aspects of climate across different parts of Antarctica. I won't go into the detail of this plot just now, but all I can say is that is a plot looking at temperature change into the future with the steady background climate change and then year-to-year variability on top, just to illustrate the major role of year-to-year variability in the seasonal projections, and looking at how best to sort of bring that information into a projection, into looking at projections and predictions. In theme 4, in terms of cross-disciplinary impacts, there was a really successful workshop that we had ran in May and June. Thanks very much to Jan Lennertz for running this. The International Fern Workshop, and it had approximately 150 participants from across the world. And actually this workshop illustrated that in addition to the scientific aims of ANCLIN now, the capacity building aspect is very important as well. And we brought in coaching for presentations for 18 early career researchers. And I think that from what I hear, that was very, very well received. And then linking across disciplines, a big part of that is working with other scientific research programs, which we'll hear about later in this session. So there's a conference next year that will be a great, with Instant, which will be a big chance to link up across different SRPs. And then theme 5, communication of results to stakeholders. The other scientific research program that we hear from, and ICON, are a big part of this. And one of our committee members also works with ICON. Well, in fact, a number do. And partly through that, we've had climate-related presentations at meetings such as the International Whaling Commission, workshop in December last year. Then through SCAR as well, COP26 side events. Something that we're working on internally is an annual update on science relevant to Anklin now. The exact form of this update is still under discussion, but we're certainly interested in developing it in a way that could be accessible to the wider audience. So we'll be working on that going forward and interested in discussing how ways in which that could develop. So the team in Anklin now, so co-chief officers, myself and Lana Weiner, and then we have a scientific steering committee who have all contributed hugely to what we've been doing, the activities we've had in the last year and a half. And they're all linked into different themes, but in many ways we've also just been working together a lot. But of course, the steering committee and the leadership are really part of a growing community. In the first part of Anklin now, one of our major focuses has really been to just develop a larger community and bring more people into the program. We hold monthly science talks to try and encourage dissemination of science and keep momentum going on discussions. And we have early career researcher support for attendance at conferences and workshops. If you're interested in joining, just go to the website on the SCAR website. I think there was a link just posted to that in the chat, so and you can go there. And there's a membership application form that you can fill in. And as I mentioned, we have many other ways of following our activities, including a YouTube channel with those monthly talks. Thanks very much for listening, and I look forward to discussing more later today.
Thank you very much, Tom. I think other than, the aim with this mini symposium to give an overview and to link the SRPs, I think what is also quite important is that we just put out there exactly what these different programs do, these research programs, and also for people in the audience or the wider community to become involved. So I think for all of these, where you feel that your work collaborate or overlap or contribute, please reach out to these various groups and just get involved. Being part of a much larger network is always much better than working alone. Moving on to our second SRP, which is Instant. Tom Nash, just a very brief introduction. Tom is a professor in earth sciences at the Antarctic Research Centre, Victoria, University of Wellington. His research focuses on past, present, and future climate change, with specific emphasis on how the Antarctic ice sheets respond to climate change and influence the global sea levels. I almost said sea level rise, but sea levels. He's also the leader of the New Zealand Antarctic Platform ICE, Ocean and Atmosphere, and co-leads the NZ, or the New Zealand Sea Rise. Tim, also the recipient of the Tinker Muse Prize for Antarctic Science and Policy in 2014. Tim, over to you. Thank you for your time also today.
Thanks, Bettine. I'll just share my screen, see if we can do that successfully. And how's that looking? Do you see the presentation?
Great stuff, yes.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone, wherever you are, whatever time zone you're in. Yeah, it's a great pleasure to talk to you about Instant. Florence Corleone and I are the co-chiefs. We've had some great workshops in the business week, and we're now into the Open Science Conference. So that's really fun, and there's going to be some good talks during the week from some of the SRPs and from Instant members in particular. Florence will do the second run of this mini-symposium as I was unable to do that, so we just swapped that round. So she'll do that on the 4th of August. Like Tom pointed out, there is plenty of information available on the SRPs and on Instant on the SCAR website. We have our own website, and you can follow us in various forms of social media. So despite the challenges, I guess, of the last 2 years, we are up and running. And putting together this report and presentation for the Open Science Conference, Florence and I were quite surprised about how much progress we had actually made. And so that's great. And we do want to thank, a lot of people who supported enthusiastically, including the SCAR Secretariat and XCOM, and of course the science community that have embraced these SRPs, even although, we haven't actually met in person. So again, what is Instant and what do we do? If you're still wondering about that, or you want more information, there are lots of resources on the SCAR website, but our own website's even cooler, because we've got a great science communicator, Simone Vicky, working on that. But also, you can get more detail in these documents that are on the website, and you can figure out how to sign up and get involved and who to contact. I think it's important to point out that SCAR, Deneb showed up front, the SCAR family. It's quite a complex looking beast, but we are sponsored by all 3 science groups. We're particularly relevant to geosciences and physical sciences, but we're evolving into the life sciences and are quite excited about some of the early projects we're doing around genomics and that sort of thing, reconstructing Antarctic seaways and under past warmer climates. So there's lots of potential for expansion, and of course the door is open to everyone to get involved and join up, and you'll see how you can get involved a bit more as I keep talking. So what is the motivation behind Instant? Essentially it's this, and it hasn't really changed over the last couple of IPCC assessment reports. It's the deep uncertainty in future sea level, which turns out it's pretty much an Antarctic problem. And the AR6 report just reinforced that, where it produced a range of sea level projections to 2100 and beyond for processes that are known with medium confidence or better. But it also recognized that there were some processes we know with low confidence that have been published that are important, particularly in the context of the Antarctic ice sheet. And if they play out this century or in the centuries to come, lead to a much higher sea level, high end of sea level rise. So they produced this low confidence projection as well. And this has really been a challenge, and it continues to be a challenge for those involved in coastal zone management who have to make decisions around the adaptation to sea level rise and what to plan for and what to expect. So this is very much in our wheelhouse. This is our core business of trying to understand the instabilities that may or may not be important for the future contribution of the Antarctic ice sheet to sea level rise. And we know what they are. They've been talked about a lot, the marine ice sheet instability, which relates to the ice sheet, particularly the West Antarctic ice sheet, retreating potentially irreversibly into its over-deepened subglacial basin. And of course, the ice cliff collapse, the domino effect, which can play out once the ice shelves go, and they can go catastrophically and very quickly as well through hydrofracture. So these instabilities, if they play out, lead to much higher levels of sea level rise in the coming centuries. And it led the IPCC to make this pretty bold statement in the summary for policymakers that 2 meters of sea level by 2100 and 5 meters by 2150 globally could not be ruled out. due to deep uncertainty in these ice sheet processes. So if you want more detail on these instabilities, on these uncertainties, and on the role of instant and how we're trying to address this, there's a really great paper that Florence led that was published in EOS, when was it, earlier this year. And this is the diagram from it, just showing the current trajectory we're on, the future trajectories depending on emission pathway, and the response of sea level to that level of warming. So a lot of this new information is in these citations here. And yeah, I'd just point you to that if you're interested in a fairly non-technical explanation of what instant is all about. If we get into the aims and the structure a bit more, we're about past sea level, we're about future sea level change, we're about taking a systems approach to try and understand the interactions between the ocean, the atmosphere and the ice sheet, so the climate and the ice sheet, and then also the bedrock under it, the solid earth interactions with the ice sheet, the feedbacks that might be positive or negative, speed things up, slow things down, and really how important, or what are the rate determining processes, and how important are they? And all of this from observations, from paleoclimate studies, from a whole range of process studies to improve the skill and performance of Antarctic ice sheet models, reduce the uncertainty of the mass contribution from the Antarctic ice sheet that is used for projections of future sea level rise. And that leads us into a very applied area where we interact with end users, with the public, with practitioners to communicate the uncertainty, to help them understand risk, to help them use this uncertain information in their planning and managing and adapting to climate change. So there's very much a applied area that involves social scientists and a range of interdisciplinarity in there. One of the questions we're interested in is, what is a safe landing climate for the Antarctic ice sheet? Is it 2 degrees? Is it 1.5 degrees? We know there's the potential of threshold behavior of irreversible, ongoing, multi-generational loss if we cross those thresholds. So we've structured it into 3 interconnected themes: the climate interactions with the ice sheet, the solid earth interactions with the ice sheet and their dynamics, and then the integration of that into models that then can improve the projections of global sea level rise, where we work with that projection sea level community. So in a nutshell, these 3 diagrams sort of summarize what I've just said. This one on the left by Florence is really summarizes all the key oceanographic, atmospheric, ice, glaciological, and solid earth processes that we're interested in. So everyone in the instant team would be able to find a home and put their name to one of these processes that they're studying, even if it's the detail of the boundary layer below the ice shelf and the interaction with the ocean, or whether it's a bigger scale, continent scale, glaciological modeling. So yeah, I guess I should talk about partners as well. And we're not the only ones focusing on this problem. And we're partnered very closely with WCRP, World Climate Research Program, and through CLIC, which is the core project looking at the cryosphere. And CLIC houses the ISMIT project, which is the ensemble approach to improving the land ice contribution to sea level. So I guess the differentiation and the complementarity is that on the right here, our partners are focused more or less on the medium confidence processes that are being put into community ice sheet models. On the left-hand side here is us, and we're trying to figure out what process particularly matter for the Antarctic ice sheet, so that those processes, which are currently low confidence, may become moderate, medium to high confidence, and then get built in to these projections with the community ensemble style approaches. We might decide that some of them are less important because they're not widespread. They don't matter as much as we thought they did, but we just don't know. So that's that's where we're at. Associated with these couplings of the systems are feedbacks, and generally in our game, positive feedbacks are the norm and they make things happen faster. But the solid earth can also provide a negative feedback. When the ice sheet retreats, the solid earth rebounds, glacial isostatic adjustment, and stabilizes the retreat of the ice sheet and potentially slows it down. So there's some really exciting frontier research coming in this area where solid earth models are being coupled with ice sheet models for future projections. And we're seeing the effect of that negative feedback as well as the other positive feedbacks. And I just put a couple of papers here which look at the effect of fresh water. When you melt the ice sheet, the ice shelves, put the fresh water in the ocean, that provides a cap over the surface of the ocean and can actually increase the amount of heat coming into the grounding line and increase the amount of melt. So these are the sort of processes, these are the sort of instabilities and interactions that the project is focused on. And Bettine, just give me a nod when I've got a few minutes to go so I don't get too far behind. So there in a nutshell is our ecosystem. Theme 1, which is the climate and the ice sheet interactions. Theme 2, the earth, solid earth, ice sheet interactions. Then there's this data modeling integration hub, which we're just really trying to understand. We're getting it up and running, but we want it to be a place of innovation where the modelers are saying, we need these observations, we need to understand these boundary conditions, and then vice versa, the modelers are able to determine which processes are important and where the coupling occurs between the different elements of the system, so that hopefully we come out with some fairly new sophisticated models that reduce the uncertainties of the mass contribution, that then we work with the sea level community to include in future ice sheet projections. So you can see there's a lot of SCAR connections on the side here. These are the groups within SCAR, the science groups within particularly physical sciences and geoscience. And there are our external partners are equally important, which I've already talked about on the right-hand side, to getting to this more applied end, to getting to these impacts. Within these hexagons, you can see subcommittees. And this is really where the action happens. This is where the science is being done. These are ground up, these are grassroots organized, community organized subcommittees within the themes. And you can read them off there. There's a whole range, and I'll go into that in a bit more detail. So we're a big family, and here's the leadership. The steering committee, we're quite pleased with, because these people are really experienced leaders within SCAR, but they're also leaders within the external partner community, and they bring those connections as well. The theme leaders are a mix of youth and enthusiasm and talent, and some older experience, which is great as well. So the 3 themes. And then we've listed all the subcommittees in theme 1, 2, and 3 here. So there's about 40 people alone just involved in the leadership. We're nearly 300 in terms of membership. We're quite diverse from a range of countries around the world. We're very proud that 30% of our membership is early career researchers, and we're really trying to reach out to them, because it's very hard for early career researchers to get engaged with people they don't know without face-to-face meetings. These are our values. We want to be inclusive, diverse. We want to provide an environment that's safe and accessible for everyone's point of view to be heard. Collaborative, of course, interdisciplinary, of course, with society, with the publics, and with the end user community. Science has to be excellent, and we want it to be impactful, because it's addressing one of the key problems of our time. I won't go through all the detail here, but when we put together this diagram, we realized that there really has been a lot going on. The greens are the internal activities, kickoff meeting, logos being designed, forming leadership. Kicking off these acronyms are the subcommittees, getting them up and running. The reds are some of the outputs, the EOS article I've talked about, the fellowships I will talk about. We have a monthly newsletter now. We have webinars that are going, and we've been pretty active at different international meetings. So we're very proud of our fellows. They got about 5,000, I think they got $5,000 US each. They're from France, China, Brazil, Australia, Sri Lanka. They're young, they're talented, and they're doing some really cool science. So it's great to have our first cohort of fellows supported. We've been supporting groups outside of Instant. We're really thrilled to be involved with the Rings group, looking at the margin of the marine-based ice sheets around Antarctica. This is a wonderful school we've been supporting for many years in the previous SRPs, where early career researchers look at hands-on work on glacial sediments and learn those skills. And we're excited to be involved with IcePro, which is a new high-resolution, last 2,000 years ice-core sediment record correlation group that was supported in the business meetings this week. Just a little flavour of where we've been at. Like Tom said, COP26, SCAR ran a great event in the Cryosphere Pavilion. So Flo was speaking there along with others. We had quite a lot of input into this. The new ACE report, the synopsis, the update that was released at the treaty meeting this year in Berlin was very, led by Stephen Chown, and he was there, and it was very well accepted by the treaty parties. So there's some really important research directions that are outlined in recommendations in this, that particularly AntClim, well, all the SRPs and potentially new SRPs should be aware of and guiding their research. And then we were at the UN Polar Oceans meeting. I'm just watching for indication, Bettine, if I'm getting if I need
1 or 2 minutes, maybe, if you could. Yeah.
Fabulous. That'll be enough. Okay, so yeah, a couple of meetings. This was fantastic. Just a week or so ago, a lot of our group were able to get to the WCRP Sea Level Conference and then the Paleo Sea Level Conference in Singapore. It just reinforced how important meetings are. But it also, I just want to say, with the Sea Level Conference, there were a lot of practitioners and end users there, and it was really very confronting to see the scale of the challenge that the world is dealing with sea level change, and the urgency and the appetite for information. Okay, that's the newsletter. I mentioned that. You can see that on our website. In terms of future activities, and we can talk more about this in the discussion, we've got a thematic issue of the Cryosphere joint with the Climate of the Past that we're putting together. You know, this sort of style, building on the sort of things we've done before, but very much with a focus of what is the state of the art when it comes to Antarctic ice sheet dynamics. Where are we at? What do we need to know? And last but not least, we are super excited about this conference, which Florence has done a lot of work. She's got a venue we're setting up. It's a year away, more than a year away, and we're expecting 300 to 500 people. You're all welcome. Get involved, and it'll be wonderful to work with other SRPs, external partners, but also the Instant family at this meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tim. That was very informative. Just 1 or 2 things that came to mind now. Joanna, thank you very much. Been posting a lot of the websites and links to papers, and so in the chat here, just making double sure that people in the audience can actually access that. I think the most important thing is there's a lot of information that are presented now in a very short time span. So I think it really would be critical to visit some of these websites and just to get an idea for what exactly is happening and how people can actually get involved. Okay, then the third SRP, and the presenter there is Gilda Kakavu, that's Ant Icon. Just a little bit about Gilda. She's a marine biologist at the Institut Pierre-Simon Laplace in France. That was my best French accent. Where research integrates genomics into the modeling of climate change impacts into Southern Ocean species. Gilda is also quite well known in the SUS community. She's been part of the Italian and also the German delegations to Camelot since 2018, and she's held a Camelot Scientific Scholarship since 2019. It's very exciting, actually. Gilda is she's the ECR on the &ICON steering committee as part of the leadership team. So it really is, for me, being part of &ICON, also very heartwarming to actually have Gilda step up and make this presentation here. A little bit about &ICON. Alex Terod and Mecca Santos were the chief officers there. Alex stepped down sometimes last year, and Daniela Liged will actually come in and take over as the second chief officer with Mecca there. Gilda, if you are ready, the floor is yours.
Perfect. I'll just bring my presentation up. Okay, can you see the presentation?
Perfect.
Great. Okay, so thank you, Bettina, for that introduction. Hi, everyone. As Bettina said, my name is Gilda Cacavo, and I'm a member of the leadership team of the &ICON Steering Committee, and I'm excited to talk to you today about &ICON. So I'd like to start by mentioning Alex Terod. Bettina mentioned him earlier. He was one of the former chief officers of &ICON, and he played a critical role in the formation of this SRP, which would not exist in the form it does today without him. So I thought he deserved a special mention. Unfortunately, he had to take a step back from an active role on the SRP, but his legacy is still with us in the SRP. So to give a bit of a rationale for how this SRP came into being, we know that Antarctica and the Southern Ocean are threatened on several fronts by multiple stressors. In creating &ICON, we wanted to develop an SRP that would facilitate, foster, and coordinate high quality transdisciplinary research, both to support and inform conservation and management in Antarctica and the Southern Ocean. So our hope with this SRP is that we will be able to inform current and future decision-making on environmental management in the Southern Ocean. &ICON is, of course, building on the previous SRPs that Janeb showed us at the beginning of this seminar. And it's also being guided by the SCAR Horizon questions. SCAR's recognition as the most important scientific advisory input into the Antarctic Treaty System, combined with the SCAR community's need to participate and provide research that directly informs policy, these have all been the driving forces that have shaped and continue to shape the development of &ICON. So in terms of broad objectives, &ICON aims to facilitate and coordinate high quality research, as I mentioned, integrate different research disciplines and ways of knowing, and inform ultimately international policy response and effective environmental governance. &ICON seeks to build bridges between scientists and policymakers, fostering iterative discussions to inform responses to emerging priorities. We want to increase awareness of contemporary and future environmental issues in Antarctica and the Southern Ocean. We want to identify vulnerable species and ecosystems and environments in and around the Antarctic, assess threats and inform the development of practical mitigation strategies, and explore ultimately holistic and integrated approaches to Antarctic conservation and environmental governance. In order to do this, we're working closely with the SCAR Standing Committee on the Antarctic Treaty System, or SCATS, as well as the Commission for the Conservation of Antarctic Marine Living Resources, or CAMLAR, to strengthen these pathways between science and policy. So in order to achieve these outlined objectives, &ICON's internal structure is divided into 3 research themes plus a synthesis theme. So research theme 1 focuses on current states and future projections of Antarctic species and ecosystems. Research theme 2 looks at sustainability and impact of human activities in Antarctica. Research theme 3 investigates socio-ecological approaches to conservation. And finally, the synthesis theme aims to integrate the 3 research themes in a way that can be used for decision-making by policymakers. So now I'll provide a bit more detail on what is involved in our 3, or rather 4 different research themes. So research theme 1 is looking at current and future states of vulnerable species, ecosystems, and environments. And they're doing this by integrating forecasts of change, projected impacts from multiple stressors, and key drivers of change, all in the context of cross-biome connectivity. Research theme 2 delves a bit more into the sustainability and impact of human activities by trying to understand the current and future extent of human activities, quantifying anthropogenic risk, synergistic and cumulative impacts of drivers, all with the goal of providing strategies for mitigating these outlined impacts. And going into research theme 3 aims to provide a social ecological perspective on Antarctic conservation. And what that means is trying to assess the role of resilience in dynamic socio-ecological systems, seeking to foster responsible and ethical governance in the 21st century, and understanding the impacts of social connectivity on environmental change. In Anticon, we know that social dimensions are inseparable from the biogeophysical components. And so Anticon recognizes that effective Antarctic conservation requires an understanding of the interactions between humans and the Antarctic environment. And finally, our synthesis theme aims to inform decision-making and policy development through systematic conservation planning, species assessments and protection, and the management of human activities. So the synthesis theme seeks to provide input into decision-making frameworks, management strategies, and vulnerability assessments, while also quantifying and dealing with biases and uncertainties in decision-making. Of critical importance to the synthesis theme's work is their ongoing collaboration with SCATS in order to strengthen connections with the CEP and the Antarctic Treaty System. Our steering committee has 17 members, a bit smaller than what was just described for instant, 3 in each theme and 5 in the leadership team. So each of the themes that I just outlined has 2 co-leads and 1 early to mid-career researcher involved in the theme leadership. The leadership team is composed of 2 chief officers, 2 deputy chief officers, and a leadership early to mid-career researcher who happens to be me. In inviting and recruiting steering committee members, we have done our best to consider gender equity and geographic diversity in order to support broad inclusion from different countries, cultures, and perspectives in the leadership of Anticon. These groups are all examples of partner groups and organizations that we feel it's important for Anticon to have links to, and which we think will be able to provide valuable input into Anticon's directions and outputs. To that end, actually, we recently put together the Anticon Advisory Committee with representatives from all of these groups. And we just had our first meeting of the Advisory Committee and hope to continue to meet with the Advisory Committee 1 to 2 times per year, keeping them in the loop with regards to Anticon activities and soliciting particular groups and members for input when appropriate. So to give you an idea of how Anticon has evolved over time and where we're headed, I will share this brief timeline overview. So the planning for Anticon took place in large part in 2021 with the development of the steering committee. This was followed by community engagement workshops to improve awareness of Anticon and solicit input from interested scientists. I actually became involved in Anticon after attending one of these workshops and reaching out to members of Theme 1 who were recruiting a new early to mid-career researcher at the time. So it can happen to anyone. The Mini-Symposium this week is an important further milestone in support of the greater cross-pollination between the SRPs, which is one of our goals. And we're currently working on our first report to the delegates, as well as, exciting, developing the Anticon Fellowship Program, which we hope to publish later this year. And I will speak more about this in the next slide. So several training workshops are planned in the coming months and into 2023 by different research themes, including a workshop in Cambridge in September by research theme 3, which I'll speak further about in an upcoming slide. By 2023, we hope to have our first SCATS Anticon Fellows recruited. There's a series of cross-theme workshops that are also being planned for later in 2023 alongside continued stakeholder engagement. And moving into 2024, we look forward to our second round of SCATS Anticon Fellows, as well as developing an early career researcher training workshop before finally working on our final report for the future and looking forward to the future, thinking about how we can plan for the next iteration of the SRP on the backs of what we imagine will be at this point a veritable bevy of publications related to anti-con themes that will have come out by this time. So as mentioned in the timeline, we're in the process of working with SCATS to develop a SCATS anti-con fellowship. The goal of this fellowship will be to facilitate capacity building and greater policy literacy in the SCAR research community. We hope to sponsor 2 fellows per year to work with a mentor or mentor team to develop a paper to present at the Committee for Environmental Protection of the ATS and the Scientific Committee of CAMLAR, respectively. The fellows will receive up to $5,000 US to cover expenses related to travel and attendance to the CEP for the ATS fellow and SC CAMLAR for the CAMLAR fellow. Anti-con is working closely with SCATS to create the fellowship scheme, to the call for applications, and develop the selection criteria for choosing the fellows themselves. The fellows will have approximately 9 months to work with the mentor or mentors to develop the paper to be presented at their respective meetings. And the difference, just to clarify, between this fellowship and existing ones like the CAMLAR Scientific Scholarship is that the fellows will participate in meetings as part of the SCAR delegation rather than any national delegation. And also, as promised from the timeline, I wanted to provide a brief overview of the workshop that Research Theme 3 will be having in Cambridge next month at the Scott Polar Research Institute, thanks to generous support from the British Academy. And the main focus of this workshop will be a comparative assessment of interactions between Antarctic environments, landscapes, and human activities, focusing in particular on the South Shetland Islands and the Antarctic Peninsula region, as well as the McMurdo Dry Valleys and Ross Sea region. And the workshop ultimately aims to provide this comparative approach to understand how these interactions inform and shape Antarctic environmental governance, and to what extent some of the lessons learned can actually be used in the future to frame Antarctic conservation efforts. And in closing, I also wanted to draw your attention to some anti-con events happening at the OSC this week. So we have later today a parallel session organized by Research Themes 1 and 3 called Rethinking Antarctic Environments and Conservation. On August 3rd, there will be a mini-symposium organized by the Synthesis Theme and SCATS on how SCAR informs and guides Antarctic policy and conservation. And finally, on August 4th, there will be a parallel session organized by Research Theme 2 on human impacts on Antarctica. So to close, I just wanted to reiterate that Anti-Con has a strong online presence through our page hosted on the SCAR website, as well as on social media. If you're interested in keeping up to date with Anti-Con, we encourage you to join our mailing list, which you can also find on our website. And if your research aligns with Anti-Con's research themes, and I'm sure many of your research points do, we encourage you to submit your research profile to our website, where we have a growing list of SCAR community members working on Anti-Con related projects. So thank you very much for your time, and I'm looking forward to taking questions and discussing Anti-Con and the other SCAR SRPs and cross-links during the following panel discussions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gilda. Thank you very much for that. Okay, just one or two things from my side before we move into the discussions. Deneb, so if I understand correctly, then the request is that we use the question and answer, the Q&A section to post our questions in. I believe that what is in the chat can also be seen there. Let me just quickly check this. So yes, so please use, for the audience, please use the Q&A. It's just easier to keep track of the questions. Let me kick this off with a question, and perhaps let's go in reverse order. Gilda, Tim, and then Gilda, Tim, and then Tom. How do you, in one or two sentences, so in other words, very brief, how do you see your SRP linking to the others, and where do you see the strong linkages? Gilda, let's start with you, just in reverse order.
So there's a couple of ways that I can see potential linkages. So first, I feel like every SRP has, and last but not least, I want to say, theme about policy interactions. All of the research that's being integrated in the different research themes has clear policy relevance. And part of the point of these SRPs is to get our research into the policy forum and actually affect governance. So I think that while the research we're integrating into these forums is different, the ways in which we're going about this is probably not too dissimilar. So I think that we could improve these aspects by increasing our coordination into that, research to policy highway, so to speak. And then the second, oh, sorry, it was 2 sentences. Okay, let's say that the second one is a sentence. The second way I thought about overlaps is, and this was alluded to, I think, in the instant presentation, genomics and predictions. So in order to predict how ecosystems are going to be affected, we need to know clearly what the environment is going to look like that's going to affect those ecosystems. And those kind of physical predictions are what we're getting from the other SRPs. So that's a clear way, at least in a research sense, that I think that there could be some interesting overlaps. So I'll leave it there for now.
Tim, your thoughts?
Okay, unmuted. Yes, well, I think there's an opportunity with our various meetings coming up, and particularly the instant meeting, to have the other SRPs represented there and presenting there and part of the discussions. And so we will extend invitations to both SRPs, certainly for that. And specifically in terms of, this is my second point, in terms of the SRPs themselves, I think it's very clear with ANCLIM now that we absolutely need to understand that near-term predictability, because that essentially is time zero for ice sheet loss. So we must know when that warming kicks in and when we're going to see some of those processes really start to play out. For anti-icon, I think lots of linkages between both ANCLIM now and us in terms of the climate change effect on the ecosystem on Antarctica, the ice sheet implications for that, which are all very policy relevant in both the treaty space and in other spaces. So I think lots of fertile opportunity. We just need to talk about it more.
Which is why I think that this mini symposium is actually very, very, very useful. Thank you to the SCAR conference for actually putting this together in the SCAR leadership. Tom?
Yeah, to link with the instance, certainly, just to echo Tim's comment in a way, the near-term changes, and I suppose in particular, looking at the role of internal climate variability in influencing when important thresholds could be crossed. So, what's the range of timescales on which, and trying to understand the uncertainty due to internal variability and external forcing in estimating when really important things may happen in the near term. And then with anti-icon, really just providing that linkage to the wider Antarctic community is hugely valuable, and it's so working with them is going to be a really great way to bring our science into more of an impactful arena, but also to understand which parts of our science we need to prioritize and develop in terms of wider impacts.
Tim, my background being biology also, so I think what was quite nice was to see your SRP, how, I mean, the geology, physical aspect there is quite strong, but how you're starting to move and pull in biological aspects also. In terms of, could you perhaps just elaborate a little bit on, the biological linkages?
Yeah, pretty exciting actually. The genomics work we're doing is with some Australian colleagues who are looking at brittle stars and octopi. I'm never sure what the plural is. And the octopi are proving really, really useful. We've got a very exciting paper we're trying to get published But using that, I guess, molecular clock genomic type approach, are able to determine where some bottlenecks were at, and when seaways were potentially opened and closed, which fit with our geological data and ice sheet models for past warm periods when we think the West Antarctic ice sheet collapsed. So that's a really great example, because it's super policy relevant, because the big question is, when we had 1.5 degrees of global warming, which is obviously the Paris target, in the past when we had it, what did the West Antarctic ice sheet do? And I think we're getting some insights into that. So that's super exciting. But I also think there's huge potential for understanding the plankton and productivity of the Southern Ocean using the geological record under past climate conditions. So for marine ecosystem function and biodiversity and that sort of thing, I think, you know, there are opportunities there. I just don't know how to develop them. We've been thinking about that a lot in New Zealand. You know, a lot of the key plankton do not fossilize and do not preserve in the fossil record, which is a struggle. But yeah, I could go on, but I think there's plenty of, you know, around the MPAs, for example, there's even, I think, potential to work with certainly anti-con, but also the impact of freshwater fluxes into the marine ecosystem. So, you know, I think there's loads, but and I'm sort of looking actually to see beyond anti-con where the next SRP is coming from out of the biological community that could address some of those questions and work closely with us.
Yeah, I mean, I think with genetics, Gilda, this is also your field, but it's also my field. You know, genetics moving into genomics, we really have exponentially increased the kinds of work that we can actually do. Gilda, that was also one of the points that you mentioned, where there potentially would be cross linkages. I'm going to go into just some of the, just so that we don't talk all the time, just going to look at some of the questions. So Asma has a question here saying, I'm curious about the impact of long-range pollution from close proximity in terms of developing countries like Chile, South Africa, and the United Nations has granted them higher CO2 emission quotas. The EU has the European Union has stringent quotas to be met by 2030 and 2050, for example, whilst developing countries are allowed more. Is this a contradiction in the common global goal of reducing climate change? Don't know who, Tim, maybe? Tom, I don't know which of you two.
I can start it. I'm not entirely sure where the question's going, but
so I think the way that I read it here is whether there's your thoughts about, like, for example, the European Union having more stringent quotas around CO2 emissions compared to, for example, developing countries such as Chile or South Africa, and whether, the impact of that potentially, what that might be, and how that would impact, just the global goal of reducing climate change.
Right. So everyone signed the Paris Agreement to reduce their emissions to below 2 degrees and hopefully close to 1.5. And, all countries have to take their share of the burden in doing that. But there's a huge injustice when it comes to climate change, both from mitigation and adaptation. And the issue is that the developing nations that are least resilient and most vulnerable didn't put the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere in the first place. It was the developing nations, and so they're often at the front line from an impacts point of view. They're the ones where there's droughts and wildfires, and sea level rise is taking their islands. So that there's a big injustice question there, but in terms of mitigation and the Paris Agreement, all countries have to act with urgency. And this was one of the points put to the Antarctic Treaty Nations in the SCAR ACE report, that they need, and there was a resolution at that treaty meeting that they go back to their countries, to their national Antarctic programs, and just reiterate how important mitigation is if we're going to avoid this climate disaster.
Tom, I don't know if you wanted to add to that.
I mean, I don't think there's too much to add, but what I would say is that, you know, I think in the last maybe 5 years, it's become clear that severe and serious impacts of climate change are actually affecting everyone. You know, here in Europe and in the USA, there are some really severe impacts that we're starting to see both in extreme events and long-term effects as well. So, you know, in terms of thinking about, you know, who's being most impacted by some of these changes, I think where some of us have been caught by surprise by quite how broadly we're starting to see these impacts.
Thank you for that. There's another question. Asma has a question how to actually get involved with SCAR and how to, you know, apply to work with SCAR, Danae, but I think we can close with that. So don't let me forget, but I think just maybe 1 or 2 words from you towards the end of this, of the session on how we can actually, you know, pull people in and what people can do to become involved in this, you know, in SCARs and the various wheels of SCAR. There's another question from Louis Pertera, and Tom, that's to you. Great effort on SCAR climate action. I still wonder if we do not need, I'm just reading exactly here, I still wonder if we do not need more applied deliverables on quantifying, weighing the benefits of, you know, Antarctic, Southern Ocean, Earth climate regulation, the ecosystem services, essentially. Could be possible to engage economists, ecologists into assessing the cost benefit of climate action as a powerful tool to advance global policy making.
Yes, thank you, Lewis, for that point. Certainly on the impacts side of things, in terms of ecosystem services or ecology, that was certainly one of the motivations for linking up with Anticon. But something that I don't think we've brought forward much in our science implementation plan is looking at sort of the economic perspective, cost-benefit analysis. It's certainly an interesting perspective, and it would be something we'd be interested in looking at more in the future. But I suppose the other point to make on this is that in terms of the work we do, one of the key things will be to try to facilitate new science and bring funding in to help, I guess, develop some of these, you know, if we're going to go towards applied deliverables, it'd be important to leverage funding to try and bring through those deliverables. And I imagine that linking up across these different disciplines and taking the, bringing the sort of economic perspective as well could be a big help in terms of identifying funding sources and collaborating on making progress in these areas. So that's a really good point and a good suggestion. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I'll, Tim and Gilda, I'll ask you in a second whether you've got anything to add, but I mean, I do think that we are moving into, you know, real transdisciplinary research, and, you know, that's the only way that we will actually advance and move forward. And with that, it's not just within the science field linking physical, geological, and biological, but I mean, the economists, and, you know, there's a whole group of people out there that can potentially add in Any thoughts, Gilda, Tim, on this?
I would just say briefly that this is a great question and a great point, Luis, and that research theme 3, for example, in Anticon about socio-ecological approaches and ideas, and thinking about the values that people have with respect to Antarctica, ecosystem services is an example of a type of quantifiable value that we can say. You know, we could say, talk about cultural values, but economic value is something that can be framed in ecosystem service context, which, for example, could be very useful in getting across the messages that we need to certain audiences that would uptake an idea of ecosystem services more quickly than simple biodiversity risks and so on and so forth. So I think this point emphasizes the value of this theme in Anticon of considering the way in which humans interpret the value of Antarctica beyond just the science.
Yeah, those are great answers, and thanks for that question. I think it's a really fundamentally important one. As Bettine says, we're moving into a research world where the answers are transdisciplinary and the questions are societal and urgent. And I think we're seeing, you know, it doesn't matter really where you look, whether it's the new SCAR strategy that's currently evolving or the WCRP, World Climate Research Program strategy. It's all about bridging and connecting with users, with society, with the needs of the broader community. And, you know, that requires scientists to think in a slightly different way. And I was at this conference, I talked about the Sea Level conference, where there was a large end user practitioner community there. And the question was asked, what can, let's put it, say, SCAR or the science community do to help with adaptation and dealing with climate change? And the biggest answer was capacity. We need capacity. We need to build capacity. We need to understand how these impacts, whether it's on the ecosystem or the climate system, are going to affect us in our part of the world and regionally. And we need help in developing that capacity, but also scientists need to sort of understand the issues, and some of them are broader. They're economic, they're social, they're about equity, all sorts of community-based values and issues that you know, we have to get into. Sorry, I'm going on a bit there, Bettine, but we have to start engaging with our user community a lot more. So I think it's a great question, and it's something we should be thinking about for the SRPs and SCAR in general.
Yeah, absolutely. Here's a question, quite an interesting one. What's the primary cause of climate change, CO2 or CH4? Which has the biggest impact on climate change, and does this have any relevance to the Anticon focus? So what really drives climate change, CO2 or methane? I'm going to leave that open.
Shall I start?
Yeah, okay. Thanks, Tom.
I mean, the short answer is that both have a big impact. I mean, the key difference is in terms of timescale of their persistence in the atmosphere. So if we cut methane emissions, then the concentration of methane would start to decline quite quickly, whereas carbon dioxide remains in the atmosphere for much a longer period of time. So I think that's a short answer, is those are the sort of the big picture differences between the two.
I would just add that every molecule of carbon, whether it's matters basically, and you know, we're at a stage now where you know, methane's pretty important because it's quite a powerful greenhouse gas, and we don't have much time. Whereas, you know, long term, as Tom says, carbon dioxide is ultimately going to determine the temperature of our planet and a lot of the climate impacts we're going to deal with. But both are important along with some other gases. They're anthropogenic and they're, almost completely responsible for the global warming that we've seen in the last 100 years.
Thank you for that. Here's a question around remotely sensed data and how important those are for the different SRPs. And if so, which kinds of data, remote data, are you actually using or in your science? I don't know, let's start with you maybe, and then we'll go Gilda, Tom, in terms of remote sensing.
Sorry, you said me first. Apologies. I thought I was second. Well, so I don't necessarily claim to speak comprehensively for the range of research that is available within Anticon, but immediately when I think of remote sensing and Anticon, I think about tracking of top predators and using remote sensing devices that are either attached to predators or satellite information. So that's where I think that kind of data could be super important for research related to Anticon. Also, if you would argue that acoustic monitoring is remote sensing, I guess, in a way. So ways in which we would be able to identify schools of krill or certain types of fish biomass. Yeah, so I guess it depends on how you define remote sensing in that sense, but these are three places where I think there could be relevant research happening in Anticon.
I'll just be short. Remote sensing is absolutely critical, whether it's satellite, space-based, whether it's airborne. Our Antarctica is a really, really big place, and it has bedrock underneath it, has an ice sheet, it has an ocean, and we have limited observations that we can put in situ in certain points. So remote sensing is absolutely key to all our endeavours, as being said.
Yeah, and from an Anticon perspective, it plays a role in many aspects of what we look at. So a very good example is sea ice, where our estimates of the extent of sea ice almost entirely rely on remote sensing, but it also can play a big part in estimating the many other aspects of Antarctic climate. So, we get information on clouds, precipitation, information on the winds as well, that around Antarctica. So one of the things that is of great uncertainty is some of the coastal winds that blow along around Antarctica and across the Southern Ocean, and we can actually gather really good information from remote sensing on near-surface winds. So it's really fundamental. If you look at our science and implementation plan, remote sensing is mentioned in part of that.
Thank you for that. Some thoughts on Gilda. You mentioned this, let's say, information highway of science information research that actually is on its way to science policy and management. But how do we, and each of the groups here actually has a link or an emphasis on influencing policy, influencing management to some extent, or feeding information into that. Tom, Tim, and then Gilda, let's go the other way around just to change the order. Just a little bit your thoughts, 1 or 2 sentences again, around how do we ensure, or how do we facilitate the uptake of our research into policy and into science policy and management?
Yeah, okay. That's very good question. I
That's
think
the
for-
$1,000,000 question, right? I mean, that is the $1,000,000 question.
so I've got some, I mean, for Antarctica, from the sort of climate science side of things, it's very important to provide information that is that's usable and useful. So if you think about other parts of the world where we have, I mean, one example, for example, is the UK. There are quite large efforts to provide information that's accessible to policymakers in the government on aspects of climate change in the UK. But it's a sort of quite heavily funded program of providing that climate information on quite a regional scale. I think for parts of the world that are not very populated, like Antarctica, it's certainly, I see it as quite a big challenge in terms of developing the investment required to bring this sort of the climate data on that regional scale to the, I guess, the policymakers and the other people who are interested in it, to bring that to them in an easily accessible way. It takes investment, and that investment is usually pushed towards well-populated parts of the world.
Tim?
I mean, you're right. It's the elephant in the room. It's the really big question, the policy science interface, and how do you have impact in that space. I think we've got to get away from the pipeline approach, where you push science in one end and then you hope that end users will just use it and know what to do with it. As Tom says, it has to be usable. And the way to get around that is to identify your end user communities. And I think we know that pretty well with SCAR. We know that we have a marine ecosystem community in terms of CAMLR that require certain information, and the marine protected areas that require certain information. We know within the treaty and the CEP, there is information needed in the climate change work program and in other aspects of what they do that we can engage with. And we know within climate change and the IPCC, and more broadly when it comes to regional impacts such as sea level, what our end users need. But you have to develop that communication at the beginning. And so when you're setting up these SRPs, you need to be using social scientists, working with the social science community, both within and outside of SCAR, and the end users in a co-productive sort of way. So you design it together and you produce it together and you implement it together. And that's easier said than done, because most of us are still working in the old pipeline model. But the ultimate goal, well, the gold-plated goal would be to be able to do it that way. And I think that's, what, again, I come back to that ACE report. I think that's what that ACE report is highlighting, that there are clear priorities needed, certainly within the treaty parties, and there are clear scientific questions more broadly that need to be priorities for us to address. But learning to work together across disciplines, it's the hardest thing. And like Tom says, it takes investment, it takes time, but we've got to keep trying.
I would echo everything that Tom and Tim have said. And I would also add from a different perspective that I hope that there's some of you in the audience that are more policy linked. I imagine many of you are more research focused, and we have to accept that we can't do everything. We can't know everything, right? If we're scientists and coming more from the research perspective in that classical sense. But I think what we're trying to do in the SRPs is equip scientists with types of information that they need to know in order to be able to better integrate and communicate with these organizations. We're bringing in the social scientists, the more policy linked people, so that we can foster those collaborations and those back and forth conversations, as Tim mentioned. And indeed, to come to the Anticon Fellowship that we're developing, the idea is that we want to hear from the CEP of the Antarctic Treaty System and the scientific committee from CAMLAR to get what are the priorities, what are the focus areas that these two groups want research priorities from, want research information from in Anticon or from the SCAR community. And then with that information, we then hope to go out to the SCAR community and recruit a fellow for CEP and a fellow for SC CAMLAR to work on addressing something from that priority list, and then working with the mentors to then present a paper that's relevant there. Now, that's just two fellows in 1 year. It's not a whole scale of the community, but I think it's a microcosm for the kind of goal of what we want to try to develop. The people that we will be recruiting are likely going to be from a more research, science, classic research background, but the idea is that we're going to be equipping them with the skills that they will need to be going to these meetings, presenting the relevant research, and also creating a model for the ways in which we want SCAR to react to these different policy bodies in terms of, not just sending what we think is important, but also, responding to what has been uptaken and what types of needs that they have.
There will also be some, there's a plenary session, isn't there, which is about science, how SCAR can provide policy relevant science coming up too. So I'm sure we'll hear a lot more on this topic during the conference.
The one thing that I've noticed also in my years of doing research is that quite often the way that we write our papers, I guess by the nature of the work that we do, but even people in relatively closely related disciplines have no idea what we're saying. So this is perhaps also, and then we expect people completely on the other side writing policy, governments and things like that to actually understand what we're saying. So I think here it might be quite important to ensure that our work also goes into these popular, science writing, popular science platforms, the conversation, Nature Africa, for example, or Nature's recently opened Nature Africa, also popularizing science. So I think that's, half the time people can't really implement if they don't understand what we are saying. So that might be something also to, just make sure that everybody understands what the importance and what the message really is. I'm looking at the chat. So one step back, Pierre Sellier said with the previous discussion before we went off around science policy implementation, some input may be required from the space weather community to address the impact of space weather on remote sensing, such as the anomalies caused by impacts in satellite electronics and things like that. So that, there's quite a strong space weather group as well. So it might be nice just to link with that. Then another question from Asma, that's for Gilda and then potentially Tom for input. Extractive industries of krill prefer to err on the reliance of such acoustic methodology to quantify the krill population, despite counter-arguments. So it's around acoustics and krill. Is the impacted the carbon sink that krill plays in climate change in the region also being quantified to argue that such companies extracting krill must err on the side of caution? So I think it's just around acoustics and krill, just documenting population sizes and densities and so of krill. Gilda, I don't know if you have any idea around that.
I am aware of these issues, but unfortunately I am not a krill focused person. So I cannot necessarily address the point directly, other than to say that it sounds like it's a very good point and question that should be considered in krill management. I think that the issues that we're seeing in CAMLAR with regards to renewing the conservation measure related to krill fishing in the Antarctic Peninsula area, the area 48.1 in CAMLAR regional management areas, has sort of been dragging on for the past couple of years in a way that has been frustrating to a lot of people, because it's extremely important with regards to not just the climate change and carbon sink, as you mentioned here, but access of krill to top predators that rely on this in the ecosystem there. So unfortunately, I can't really answer the question other than to say that it's an absolutely valid one, and hopefully there will be better progress on this point within CAMLAR. I'm not necessarily keeping my fingers crossed for the upcoming sessions in October, but perhaps next year we shall see.
Yeah, I don't have too much to add either, so I don't work on krill details of ecosystem dynamics in the ocean. So, but I'll just echo that it does sound like a good point, and certainly something to follow up.
Deneb, there is a krill group within SCAR that's being proposed now. I think maybe you can just say a word around that.
Yes, so we do have an action group on krill, and they have just put in a request to be elevated to an expert group. And so it's a very active group. So there is a lot of work that's going on, trying to understand what's happening with krill populations. And I believe that they do have a connection with CAMLAR. And so there is that back and forth with that group as well.
Thank you for that. I think on this note, it might be good. We have prepared some of the polling questions. So I think just to gauge from the audience, I see there's 162 people in the room. Joanna, if you could assist with a polling question. I think the one that might be quite informative here in the room also is whether you are currently involved in one or more of the SCAR SRPs. If we could just run that one, Johanna. So if you can we run, let me just quickly ask, do we run all of them at the same time, or can you respond to some of them and then only some of them? Otherwise, if people could just work through the list. Yeah, it's just a few very quick polling questions. Just gives an idea around our audience also. Okay, all at the same time. So it will just take a second. People in the room could please just respond to that. It also just gives an idea. Deneb, whilst we're waiting for the people to respond, could you perhaps give some idea overall in terms of SCAR? I guess we could also work through the different SRP people in the room, but just an overall idea around SCAR. There were some questions around how do I actually get involved in SCAR? Some of my work fit in asthma. We can share your details from Norway also. So, you know, just how do I become involved in SCAR? How do I link? How do I become part of the SCAR family?
Sure. It's actually quite easy to do. So if you go to the SCAR website, and again, I don't think very many people look at that structural figure that I showed, but I find it really useful. And so taking a look at that, there's all the different groups are there. And I would say there's probably something for everyone. And each of those groups actually has a web page, at least one web page at the SCAR site. And one of the links is people. And so you can actually find who the chief officers are, who the contacts are, who the other members of the group are. And honestly, if you just write to them and let them know that you're interested, they'll get back to you. I know that a lot of the groups also have mailing lists. So for example, all three of the SRPs, if you go to those websites, you'll find a link where you can sign up. And even if you don't want to be actively involved, you just want to be in touch with what they're doing, it's very useful to be able to see when there's a seminar, when there's a meeting, when there's a new paper that came out. So I would say, don't be shy, that SCAR is a very open and welcoming organization. And again, there's lots of, as you saw on that diagram, lots of little squares. There's lots of subsidiary groups. So if there's something that you're interested in, please contact the people that are in charge of that group. If you want, you can contact me. I'm happy to also respond and put you in touch with somebody that can help you get involved. But especially for early career scientists, students, I can't tell you how much this can help you in your career to start getting involved with an organization like SCAR, especially because of the fact that we have a international reach. And so you really get to benefit from a lot of experience from a lot of different people in a lot of different areas.
The one thing that I must mention, I mean, I remember when I joined SCAR, and I think, if we think back, we all remember the first SCAR meeting and things that we went to and how we got involved. And it's, daunting and acronyms, and it is actually the friendliest, most supportive group of researchers internationally that you will ever find. I don't think there's another society that is as friendly, as embracing as SCAR is, and that was my experience in any case. So, please just go to the website, join, reach out, send emails, and become involved. It really is. It is an extraordinary environment to work in and to be involved in. One more question just around the transdisciplinary nature and the reach, also law. Asma just made a comment here around commercial law, maritime law, I guess all of those. So law is also an area that is quite prominent and that can actually feed in quite a bit into some of the work that we're doing and feeding our work through. Can we share, Joanna, the poll results? I think it would be quite nice just to see. Just looking at it. So Asia, Europe, the largest group of people joining. I see that 65 out of the 83 people that responded are not currently involved in an SRP. So again, shall we say it again, just reach out, get onto the mailing list, become part of these groups. At the end of the day, you're part of a community, you form collaborations, you form linkages. And to actually contribute to this quite often is just a sentence in your acknowledgement saying that your research actually contributes to this specific SRP. It also means that there's uptake and that there's sharing, of the work within the group. So that is really quite important. If you are not currently involved, which SRP are you interested in? More or less an equal spread across all of them, which is quite nice. Career level, lots of postgraduate students in the room. That's fantastic. PhD, MSCs and postdocs. What area expertise? I see geoscience, life science, physical sciences more or less equal, some humanities, some social sciences, and then some others. So we've got quite a group, a diverse group in the room, but what is really nice is that the interest that there is in these SRPs. Okay, let us do, because it is 10:02, so I'm also mindful of time. Let us do, shall we do 2 sentences closing from each of the SRP, and then Danep, I'll give over to you just to close the session. Gilda, let's go in reverse order. Just 1 or 2 sentences closing, please.
Anticon is on its way to getting started. I feel like our activities are going to be increasing more and more over the next coming years. There's lots of room for uptake from the community. We want your feedback. We want to be community driven. So please don't hesitate to reach out to any of the steering committee members related to the theme of the research you're interested in. And as I said, this fellowship is going to be launched hopefully by the end of this year. So keep an eye out for that. And just to echo what Bettina had and Deneb were saying earlier with regards to SCAR as a whole, Anticon reiterates that we are open, welcoming, and also supportive of early mid-career researchers. So in particular, if you feel, oh, it's just my PhD research, no, it's important, it's valuable, we want it, we want to hear your voice. Get involved, write to us, and also a tiny plug for APEX, the Association of Polar Early Career Scientists, with whom SCAR also works quite closely. They are also a great organization to get you involved in polar sciences generally, outside of SCAR specifically. So that's, I think, my final notes for today.
Am I next? Well, I'll go next.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you, Tim.
That was great. I reiterate all of that. And I just, reinforce that SCAR is only going to be as good and successful as the people coming into it. You particularly you early career researchers, you're the energy, you're the future. I'd reiterate, it's friendly, it's fun. I mean, I've got a family, an extended family of friends and colleagues around the world that I've worked with and met through SCAR and through Antarctic research. And yeah, don't be put off. We're not as scary as maybe we look. And just sign up, get involved. And once we get back into, we're always aware of our carbon footprint and not traveling too much, but it is important. I think it'll be easier once we can meet face to face, just every now and then. And so just hang in there. It'll get easier. There'll be conferences, there'll be workshops, there'll be more you can get involved with.
Thank you. And yeah, from an Ampton Now perspective, it's an 8-year program and we're just 1.5 years in. So there's still loads of time to get involved. We've spent the first little period really developing a large base of members, but having activities getting going now and really starting on working on some of the activities and outputs. So it's definitely not too late to get involved, and it never is. I would also say I see Antlin Now and the other SRPs as, well, I see it as being there as a framework to provide a platform for people to work together, meet each other, and make scientific progress. So, a lot of things we do, what we're trying to do is to make it as easy as possible for you all to get together, work together, and collaborate. And just to echo what Tim and Jill have said, that can end up providing you with a huge number of amazing connections across the world and amazing experiences. So please do get involved. It'd be great to see you joining and collaborating in the future.
Deneb?
Yes, thank you. So first, I would like to thank Bettine for agreeing to chair this session, and to Tom and Tim and Gilda for making such excellent presentations. We really appreciate you taking the time to do that. And I would like to thank everybody who's attending the session. We really appreciate you coming to this. And as I said before, I think SCAR probably has something for everyone. And so please go to the website and just poke around and see what's there. And I think you'll find something of interest. And again, just get in touch with the people that are in charge of the various groups, sign up for the newsletters, and I think you'll be very happy with what you get out of SCAR. I'd also just like to mention that the next Open Science Conference is in 2024 and hopefully is going to be in person in Chile. And that we do have a biology symposium that will be in person next summer in New Zealand. So again, check the SCAR website for details on those meetings. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the Open Science Conference.
Thank you very much. And then a last, just before we close this, thank you to the people that actually took the time to attend, to the presenters, to the SCAR Open Science Conference and the organizing team. Thank you very much for putting the session and allowing time in the program for the session. I think it was hugely useful. And then to the SCAR leadership team for excellent leadership. Thank you very much to you guys, Danette. Enjoy the rest of the...
So if I could also
Sorry.
add, I would like to also thank the technical staff for making this possible, and also the SCAR Secretariat. Everybody worked really hard to bring this together.
Absolutely. You don't know how stressful it is to put a conference together until you've actually done it. So a great applause. We're looking forward to an excellent conference that's just starting. Yes, be safe, be well, and enjoy the conference.
Thank you very much.